She lay crumpled in a roadside ditch off a road most people had forgotten, bruised, unconscious, and nearly hidden beneath a blanket of falling leaves. Nearby, her young son stood trembling, quiet as a whisper, waving desperately at the only car that had bothered to slow down when everyone else just kept driving. The man inside the truck had no idea that pulling over in that moment would upend everything, not just for the woman and the boy, but for himself as well. If stories about unexpected kindness, hard-won healing, and the beauty of second chances speak to you, then stay close. Hit subscribe and follow along, because this journey is one you won't want to miss. Sometimes, all it takes is a single act of compassion to rewrite someone's entire life. Let me tell you what happened the day he chose to stop. Calder Wolf hadn't planned to be on that back road. His usual route home was the highway, straighter, faster, and full of fewer memories. But that day, something about the golden sunlight dancing through the cottonwoods pulled him off course. Maybe it was the crisp bite of October in the air, or maybe it was Junie, his 6-year-old daughter, pointing out the window and saying, "Daddy, the trees are whispering," or maybe it was just time for something in his life to shift. The road wound tight, narrow, and mostly deserted. Gravel crunched beneath the tires of his old Chevy pickup as Calder drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other nursing a cup of black coffee that had long gone lukewarm. A quiet folk tune played on the radio. Everything felt still, simple, and then, in an instant, it all broke. A young boy darted out onto the road. Calder slammed the brakes. The tires skidded violently, the truck fishtailing across loose gravel. Coffee splashed across his flannel, but he barely felt it. His heart hammered as he shoved the gear into park and flung the driver's door open. The boy didn't run. He just stood there, barefoot and wide-eyed, dirt streaking his cheeks, and something red across his face that might have been blood. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He only lifted a small, shaking finger and pointed toward the trees. Calder's eyes followed. At the edge of the ditch, buried beneath a drift of leaves, was a woman's body. He took off running. His boots slipped on the soft earth as he scrambled down the incline, knees hitting hard beside her. She was folded on her side, like a forgotten rag doll, blonde hair tangled and matted, clothes damp and torn. A thin ribbon of blood traced from her temple to her jaw. Her mouth was slightly open. Her chest rose, barely. "Ma'am," Calder said, voice tight, "can you hear me?" She didn't answer. He reached for her wrist. Her pulse was faint, but still there. He glanced up at the boy who hadn't moved, still pointing like a statue carved from fear. Calder knew that look. It was the emptiness of someone who'd waited too long for help and stopped believing it was coming. He had worn that same look the day he lost his son. "Okay," he whispered, trying to stay steady. "Okay, I've got you." He sprinted back to the truck, grabbing whatever supplies he could. A wool blanket, duct tape, a bit of fishing line, a half-empty bottle of sanitizer, and a stained rag from his toolbox. It wasn't much, but he'd patched people up with less. He wrapped the blanket around her gently, careful not to shift her neck. With the duct tape and fishing line, he fashioned a rough brace to stabilize her clearly dislocated arm. He poured sanitizer on the rag and dabbed at the wounds on her face, murmuring soft apologies as she flinched under his touch. When she let out a faint groan, Calder breathed out. She's breathing, he said quietly, glancing at the boy who'd moved a little closer now. What's your name? Calder asked. The boy blinked. Leo. Leo, he repeated, committing it to memory. I'm Calder. I'm going to get you both somewhere safe. Leo gave a small nod. Then, without a word, he reached out and gripped Calder's hand. The woman in his arms felt far too light, underfed, fragile. As he lifted her and climbed back up the ditch, he could feel her body trembling even beneath the blanket. He set her carefully in the back seat, angled the seatbelt across her shoulder, and then opened the passenger door for Leo. The boy climbed in silently and sat stiffly, arms folded tight across his chest. Calder put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. He didn't call 911, not because he didn't trust them, but because something in his gut whispered, wait. She had the look of someone the system had already failed one too many times. As the sun sank low behind the hills, his cabin came into view. It was a modest cedar-framed house nestled at the forest's edge, a porch swing that hadn't moved in months, a chimney that smoked only on Sundays. He parked, unlocked the front door, and came back to carry her inside. Junie, who'd been dropped off by a neighbor after school, came running when she heard the truck. Daddy, she called, eyes wide. Who's that lady? Does she need our help? Sweetheart, Calder said, kneeling. Can you bring me the big pillow from the couch? Junie nodded and raced off, her pigtails bouncing. He laid the woman gently on the couch and tucked the pillow beneath her head. Leo hovered nearby, fists clenched. Is she going to die? He whispered. No, Calder answered, his voice calm, steadier than he felt. Not tonight. Underscore 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 underscore. When night fell, the cabin was still. Junie was asleep in Calder's bed. Leo had finally nodded off in the armchair, the oversized coat still wrapped around his small frame. Calder sat beside the woman, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm, wondering what kind of storm she'd survive to end up in that ditch. Even bruised, her face held a fierce sword of beauty. There was strength in her jawline, a quiet fire beneath her brow, a tremble in her lips even as she slept. There were stories written all over her, and something in his bones told him this was only the start. He's all right, Calder said as he headed toward the hallway. Sleeping like a rock. My daughter tucked him in herself. Myra's breath hitched. She tried to sit up too fast, and a sharp bolt of pain tore through her side. She gasped, one hand flying to her ribs. Easy, Calder said, stepping closer. You've got at least 2 bruised ribs and a dislocated shoulder. I didn't have a proper splint, so I improvised. You what? She asked, her voice thin with disbelief. He nodded toward her arm. Fishing line, duct tape, and a piece of shelfwood. Not exactly textbook, but it worked. Mira glanced down, blinking at the contraption. Sure enough, her arm was stabilized, crude but steady, and more carefully done than she would have expected. I'm Calder Wolf, he said, his voice calm and steady. You and your son were by the road. He waved me down. And just like that, the memory surged back. Leo. The gravel. The pain. And the prayer she'd whispered not for herself, but for her son's life. Her voice cracked as she asked, How long have I been here? Just over a day, Calder replied. She looked up sharply. You should have taken me to a hospital. I would have, he said quietly, but I figured if you needed the police or a doctor, you'd have asked for them by now. Her heart thudded. He knew. Or at least he had a pretty good guess. And I didn't want to take the chance that someone might try to separate you from your boy, he added, softer now. Mira stared at him, stunned. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not in years. Not since her husband died and the world had stopped being gentle. No judge had ever seen a mother worth protecting. No cop had ever asked about the bruises. No neighbor had knocked. But this stranger had. Her bottom lip trembled before she clamped it shut with a thin, breathless line. Calder didn't press. He simply stepped back and moved into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with a cup of water. "You should drink," he said, holding it out. She took it with both hands, fingers trembling. As she drank, her eyes drifted around the room again, drawn repeatedly to the bookshelf. Titles ranged from Steinbeck classics to weathered old issues of National Geographic to a children's book with a frayed spine. "Are we out in the woods?" she asked. "Technically, yeah," he said. "Nearest town's about 15 miles that way down the ridge. This place is mine. Built it myself." He paused, then added, "Well, me and my late wife." Mira froze. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," he said simply. "She's been gone 5 years." She glanced at the fire. "Feels like I've been here longer than just a day." "Time moves different out here," he said. "Sometimes it stretches. Sometimes it lets you breathe again." Mira didn't respond. She wasn't sure she could. Underscore 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 underscore. Just then, a soft set of footsteps echoed from the hallway. A little girl appeared, hair a nest of golden curls, dragging a well-loved stuffed fox by its tail. "Daddy," she whispered, "is that her?" Calder nodded. "Come say hi, Junie." The girl stepped closer, cautious but curious. "Hi. I'm 6. Are you the boy's mom?" Mira blinked at her, then offered a small smile. "Yes. I'm Mira. Your boy fixed my flashlight all on his own, you know that." Junie gave a solemn nod, then leaned in and whispered, "He's kind of like magic." Calder chuckled, a warm sound low in his chest. "She's not wrong." Junie tiptoed forward and gently set the fox beside Myra's pillow. "You can borrow him," she said. "His name's Kip. He helps." Then, just like that, she vanished down the hall again. Mira stared at the stuffed animal, then looked up at Calder. Her voice lowered. "Why are you doing all this?" He held her gaze without hesitation. "Because once someone stopped for me when they didn't have to. And because your boy looked at me like maybe I was still worth something." Her throat tightened. She looked away, hoping he didn't see the tears welling in her eyes. But he did. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel ashamed for it. Underscore 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 underscore. Calder stood out on the porch the next morning, watching the sun rise over the ridge like melted gold spilling across the hills. It had rained before dawn, leaving the ground wet and fragrant. His hands were still dusted with flour from kneading dough, the recipe scrawled on a worn index card that Junie had once tried to color over with crayons. The cabin behind him was quiet. He stepped inside and wiped his palms on a towel. The scent of cinnamon and yeast mingled with the faint burn of pine and ash from the fireplace. Mira was sitting up now, not completely, but enough to reach for the glass of water beside her bed without too much pain. It was progress. Her face had more color than it had the day before. A blush of pink had returned to her cheeks. She'd even managed to smooth her hair back with one hand. There was a fragile grace in the way she moved, like someone who expected comfort to come with consequences. "Morning," Calder said gently, careful not to startle her. She nodded. "Smells like a bakery in here." "I bake on Sundays," he replied, though it was clearly a Tuesday. "It makes the place feel less empty." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. Her eyes wandered to the kitchen where Junie sat on a stool, eyes locked on a bowl of rising dough like it might burst into song. Calder returned a few minutes later with a tray, scrambled eggs still warm, toast slathered with blueberry jam, and thin apple slices dusted with cinnamon. Mira glanced down at the plate, then back up at him. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said simply. "But I wanted to." She hesitated, then slowly picked up the fork. Her movements were cautious, like someone afraid of breaking something invisible. After a few careful bites, she said, "Leo mentioned your daughter has a whole box of art supplies." "She does," Calder said, chuckling. "She draws on everything she's not supposed to. Last week I found a dragon mural inside my toolbox lid." Myra's lips curved just a little. The expression looked strange on her, unexpectedly soft, like it belonged to someone who hadn't spent their life bracing for pain. "You're good with kids," she said. He shrugged. "Some days. Other days, I'm just trying to make it to bedtime without stepping on a Lego." She let out a quiet laugh, and this time, it was real. Underscore 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 underscore. Leo came in then, carrying a flashlight in one hand and Kip under his arm. "I fixed it," he said, flicking on the beam with pride. Calder raised a brow. "How?" "Wires were loose," Leo replied. "I borrowed one from the radio." "You're 7, right?" Leo blinked. "Almost 8. Calder shot a glance at Mira, who gave a small, almost apologetic shake of her head. "He's always been that way," she said. "Takes things apart, puts them back together better than they were." Calder crouched down beside Leo. "Remind me not to let you near my truck." "I could make it faster," Leo said, stone-faced. Calder grinned. "And that's exactly what I'm afraid of." Underscore 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 underscore. Later that afternoon, once Junie had gone off to school with the neighbor and Leo had curled up with a stack of books from Calder's shelf, Mira spoke up from the couch. "Could you help me get to the porch?" she asked. "I want to feel the sun." He grabbed a light shawl and gently helped her to her feet. Her grip on his forearm was tight, her jaw clenched against the pain. But she didn't complain. They walked slowly, step by step, until she eased into the rocking chair on the porch. And then she exhaled like someone who hadn't drawn a full breath in years. Her hand clung tightly to his forearm, her jaw clenched as pain shot through her, but not a word of complaint left her lips. Once she was seated, she let herself lean back, releasing a slow breath like someone finally surfacing after being underwater too long. The forest stretched out before them in layers of rustling gold. Birds called overhead like familiar voices returning home. "You stay out here year-round?" she asked. "Yeah. Just me," Calder said, then tilted his head. "Well, me and Junie. But yeah, just us." She went quiet for a beat, then said, "After my husband passed, the silence used to scare me. It felt like it shouted at me when I was alone. I'd keep the TV on, play music, anything really to drown out my own thoughts." He nodded slowly, saying nothing. "Funny thing is," she continued, her voice softer now, "I'm not scared of it here." Calder didn't offer an answer. He didn't have to. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Underscore 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 underscore. underscore 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 underscore. That evening, while Calder chopped vegetables for stew, Mira called out from the couch. Do you ever just get tired? He looked up from the cutting board. Tired of what? Of carrying all this, she said, motioning around the cabin toward Junie, then finally to the quiet weight that hung between them. Of holding it all together. He paused mid-slice, the knife hovering above a carrot. Every single day. She blinked, caught off guard by his blunt honesty. But then Junie laughs, he added, or I see how the firelight hits a page just right while I'm reading. Or someone I never expected wakes up on my couch and reminds me I still have it in me to care. Mira looked at him and something flickered in her expression. Something raw, maybe admiration, maybe sorrow. Or maybe both, all braided together. She dropped her gaze to her lap. My in-laws used to say I wasn't fit to raise Leo. Called me unstable. Too emotional. Said I was soft. They threatened to take him away. Her voice grew quieter. And then, one night, I didn't get the bedroom door locked in time. Calder's hand froze above the cutting board. Leo saw the whole thing, she whispered. I grabbed him and just ran. Into the dark. And I never went back. He set the knife down slowly, gently. No rush. No noise. You didn't just run, he said. You got him out. You survived. Mira nodded, tears quietly carving lines down her cheeks. Barely, she said. Calder stepped closer, then handed her a clean dish towel. She took it with the same care someone might use handling something precious. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, after Junie and Leo had both drifted off to sleep, Calder sat alone on the porch. A storm was brewing out over the ridge. The air buzzed with the weight of it, thick and humming. Inside, Mira was resting easier than she had before. Her breathing slow, peaceful. Calder looked up at the sky and shut his eyes. He didn't know what was coming, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel afraid of it. He'd lived in the woods long enough to notice when something felt different. And this time, it wasn't Mira. It was the boy. Leo wasn't just sharp, he was something else entirely. Calder had met bright kids before. Junie had taught herself to read road signs when she was 4. But Leo, he had something behind his eyes. Like his mind was constantly turning gears, doing math no one else saw. And the strange thing was he wasn't trying to impress anyone. That's what unsettled Calder most. There was an old cuckoo clock sitting on a dusty shelf in Calder's workshop. His late wife, Anna, had picked it up at a flea market in Vermont. Called it charming. It hadn't ticked in decades, since the Clinton era, probably. Calder had meant to toss it more than once, but never followed through. That morning, when he stepped into the garage to grab his tool bag, Leo was already there. Balanced on a milk crate, hands buried up to the elbows in brass parts and rusted gears. He hadn't asked for permission. He'd simply opened it up, lined up the components like a surgeon, and started fixing it. Calder leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Need a hand? Leo didn't look up. No, thank you. You know what you're doing? I read a book about pendulum timing, he said, like he was mentioning the weather. The problems in the escapement wheel? Calder raised his eyebrows. What's your last name, Leo? The boy paused. His face stayed neutral, but his hands hesitated. Whitmore. Calder nodded slowly, noticing the beat of hesitation. You hungry? Leo finally looked up, his blue eyes bright, almost too clear. And starving. Calder gave him a small smile. Let's fix that first. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. At breakfast the next morning, Mira sat with her damp hair wrapped in a towel. Her bruises had started to fade at the edges, turning from angry purple to something more survivable. She looked stronger, though there was still a carefulness in her movements, like someone who hadn't stopped flinching at good things. Calder poured her a fresh cup of coffee. "Your kid fixed my clock," he said. Mira lifted a brow. "Of course he did. You homeschool him?" She paused. "We used to. My husband, he was brilliant. Design engineer. Thought in blueprints. But after he passed, everything changed." "What about school?" Calder asked. Mira looked down into her coffee. "I tried public school for a while. The teachers said Leo was disruptive. Said he corrected them too much. That he didn't fit in." Calder snorted. "That's code for he made us uncomfortable." She gave a tiny smile. "He started building things out of scrap. One night I woke up and found he'd rewired the hallway light to work with a motion sensor. I asked how he figured it out. He said he just listened." Calder watched the boy across the room. Leo was sitting cross-legged with Junie, building a solar system from nuts, bolts, and buttons. Each planet had its scale and its orbit suspended on string and chopsticks. Junie let out a giggle as her little moon collided into Saturn. "I've never met a kid like him," Calder murmured. "You and me both," Mira replied softly. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that afternoon, Junie insisted Leo learn how to climb trees. They wandered into the backyard, a patch of dirt and oak trees that had once held a swing, long gone to time and weather. Calder followed behind, splitting logs with his axe, but always watching. At first, Leo refused to go up. Said he didn't like heights. Junie just told him he didn't have to climb high, just high enough to see what the leaves looked like from the inside. That was enough. By the time Calder wiped sweat from his brow, Leo was halfway up the tree. His arms were stiff, his legs shaky, but he didn't stop. Junie cheered from below like it was the championship game. When he finally jumped down, laughing, Calder turned and saw Mira standing on the porch watching her son. And the look on her face nearly broke him. It was the look of someone seeing her child finally allowed to just be a child. Underscore 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 underscore. As the sun dipped low, Mira insisted on helping with dinner. She wouldn't hear of lying on the couch again. Calder handed her some carrots and watched carefully as she chopped with her good arm, moving slowly but with skill. "I used to work in a cafe," she said, slicing with practiced rhythm. "Before everything changed." "What happened after?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Then, I married up." Calder raised a brow. "That always a bad thing?" Her smile was tight. "Depends how far up you climb and how far they let you fall when the ladder breaks." He didn't push or prod. Instead, he just reached across the counter and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "I don't care where you've been," he said. "Only if it threatens where you're going." Mira froze for a second. Then, without a word, she turned back to chopping. But her hands, they didn't shake quite as much anymore. underscore 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 underscore. That night, while Junie and Leo drifted off beneath a fortress of couch cushions and an old patchwork quilt, Calder pulled out the old tin where he kept things he hadn't touched in years. Letters, memories, photographs. Tucked among a few worn photos of Anna and their baby boy, Noah, was an envelope still sealed. Whitmore Industries. Confidential. He remembered the day it arrived. It was the morning after Noah's funeral. A letter he'd never opened. It might have been a condolence. Maybe an offer. He never wanted to know. Now, staring at it, his heart thudded heavy in his chest. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Mira standing outside in the pale glow of moonlight, wrapped in her shawl, her expression urgent. "I just remembered something," she said, voice low. "The name Whitmore, my husband worked for them. And his father, Thomas Whitmore. He disappeared right after the funeral. No one's seen him since." Calder's grip tightened around the envelope. It all clicked. The boy with the engineer's mind wasn't just talented. He was born into something. Underscore 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 underscore. Calder could always sense a storm before it broke. In the ridge country, bad weather didn't announce itself with lightning, it showed up quiet. Heavy. You could feel it first, like a weight between your shoulder blades. The trees would hush. Even the birds went silent. It was as if the whole mountain held its breath. Just before dusk, he stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on the post as he watched the sky darken over the peaks, clouds like thick charcoal rolling in slow and heavy. The scent of rain hit the back of his throat like old pennies and memory. Inside, Mira folded blankets while Junie and Leo quietly packed away books and toys. The two children had become inseparable. Junie's wild brightness and Leo's careful quiet seemed to orbit one another like sunlight and gravity, holding everything in balance. Underscore 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 underscore. "You think something's coming?" Mira asked gently, noticing how long he lingered near the door. "Probably lightning," he murmured. "And wind. Strong and fast. Should we leave? Head into town?" He shook his head. "We're better off staying here. The roads won't be kind in this." She nodded, though her knuckles tightened around the back of the chair. Calder stepped outside to double-check everything. He made sure the shed was locked, the gutters angled right, the generator ready. Years of living alone had taught him that safety meant being prepared, not lucky. His movements were automatic, second nature. But even as he worked, he kept glancing back toward the window. Mira stood there, still as wire, watching the sky like it might break. And maybe it would. Underscore 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 underscore. The first raindrops came like pinpricks, as sharp, fast. But the wind had already started bending the trees long before that. The storm swept in sideways, slapping the windows with uneven rhythm like a fist searching for something loose. Leo stood near the glass, eyes wide, watching like it might come alive. Junie curled up on the floor with Kip, her stuffed fox clutched tightly to her chest. Calder moved with practiced calm. He rolled towels against the door frames, lit the emergency lanterns, hauled the firewood inside before it got soaked. And Mira? Despite her injury, she didn't flinch. She followed his lead, handing him supplies, pulling the curtains closed, checking the kids. But when the lights snapped off with a loud pop and the cabin went dark, Mira stopped cold. Calder turned in time to see her stagger back against the wall, one hand reaching for balance, eyes shut tight. Her breathing came quick and shallow. "Mira," he said gently, stepping toward her. No answer. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough for his voice to reach her through the dark. "You're safe. We've got backup light. And I've got a generator if we need it. You're not alone." Her jaw quivered. "It's not the dark," she whispered. "Then what is it?" "Being trapped," she said quietly. "When I was with them, if I messed up, they'd shut me in the pantry. No light. No windows. No idea how long I'd be there." Calder's chest pulled tight. "You're not in that house anymore," he told her. "You're in mine now. And here, no one gets locked away. Ever." She turned toward him, her eyes glassy in the flicker of the candlelight. And beneath the bruises still fading, there was something else. Something fierce. She hadn't quit. She was still fighting. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. Then came the crash, loud, heavy. Something outside had given way. Calder muttered a curse and grabbed his raincoat. "Stay with the kids. I'll check it." "No," Mira said, squaring her shoulders. "Let me go." He froze, surprised. "You've done everything," she said. "You don't always have to carry it all. Just tell me what to look for." He saw it in her eyes, then fire. Not fear. Not weakness. But a woman ready to stand on her own legs again. Before he could answer, a scream ripped through the room. "Junie!" Calder spun. Leo was gone. The door stood open. Calder didn't think, he ran. Rain lashed his face. Wind howled in his ears. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest. And then, cutting through the storm, Leo's voice. "Mom, I dropped it." Calder followed the sound, charging down the hill toward the creek bed. The old swing, the one he'd meant to burn last fall, had come loose and slammed into a maple. And there, knee-deep in mud and branches, was Leo, soaked, shaking, and holding something tight in his fist. Calder sloshed through the mess and reached him. "You okay? Are you hurt?" Leo shook his head, teeth chattering. "I dropped Kip." Junie was scared. "I didn't want her to lose it." Calder looked down. In Leo's small, mud-covered hand was the stuffed fox, soaked to the seams but still whole. His throat tightened. He knelt and pulled Leo into his arms. "You're a good brother," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I'm not her brother," Leo whispered. "You are," Calder said, holding him tighter. "In all the ways that matter." Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back at the cabin, Mira met them at the door, towel in hand, fingers trembling. When she saw what Leo was holding, she let out a sharp, broken sound. Calder helped her sit, then peeled off Leo's soaked clothes and wrapped him in a warm blanket. He glanced out the window. The storm had started to die down. The trees, though battered, stood tall, silent, and firm. The hush that followed wasn't emptiness. It felt sacred. Underscore 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 underscore. Later, after the children had fallen asleep side by side on a cot near the fire, Mira settled into the chair beside Calder. Her shoulder was wrapped, still aching. She looked at him, eyes soft. "Thank you," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For not locking the door. For being the kind of man my son could run toward, not away from." Calder didn't respond right away. He simply turned his eyes toward the sleeping children, Junie and Leo, their fingers still tangled like they'd been born siblings. "I had a boy once," he said at last, voice low. 5 years ago. He was only 3. Leukemia. We tried everything, but nothing helped." Myra's breath caught. "I didn't just lose him," Calder continued. "I lost the world after that. Walked away from my job, sold the house, packed up what little was left, and came out here with Junie. Built this place with my own hands because I needed to remember what it felt like to make something again. To build anything at all." When Mira looked at him this time, it wasn't with sympathy. It was recognition. A quiet understanding only shared by people who had lost more than words could ever hold. The storm outside had passed, but something inside them had just begun to stir. Not love, not yet, but warmth. The kind of warmth that grows from the slow rebuilding of trust between two people who have known real grief and somehow kept walking anyway. Underscore 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 underscore. Calder stood alone in the soft glow of the kitchen lantern. The storm was now just a whisper behind the cabin walls, wet branches creaking, wind sighing through the trees. His boots left faint streaks of mud across the wooden floor, each step trailing memory. He leaned against the counter, staring at the unopened envelope he'd found in the old tin box. Whitmore Industries, confidential. He hadn't gone looking for it. Hadn't planned on unsealing anything from the past. But when Mira had said the name Thomas Whitmore, something deep and unsettled shifted inside him. He turned the envelope over in his hands. The paper was thick, formal, embossed. He still remembered the courier who delivered it, too polished for the mountains, driving a car that didn't belong on dirt roads. It had shown up the morning after Noah's funeral when the air still smelled like lilies and disinfectant. He hadn't opened it, not out of rage, but because nothing, no job, no title, no amount of money could mean anything after your child stops breathing. And now, Whitmore wasn't just a name on an envelope. It had returned, in a way he never imagined. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, Mira found the envelope lying open on the kitchen table. Calder had already taken Junie to school and driven to town for propane. The cabin was calm but not silent. The fire popped gently in the hearth, its rhythm comforting. Leo sat cross-legged on the rug, quietly turning the pages of a tattered copy of The Time Machine. Myra's eyes landed on the envelope. She hadn't been one to snoop, not even when Daniel started locking his office door, not even when the bank statements stopped coming. But something about the way the paper was folded, the weight of it, the stillness it cast across the room, it made her pause. And then she saw the name again. Thomas Whitmore. Her breath caught. She stepped toward the sink and braced herself with both hands, gripping the edge like it was the only solid thing left. Was it just coincidence? Or fate? Or maybe life's cruel little habit of circling back, just when you dared to feel safe? Underscore 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 underscore. That afternoon, Calder came through the front door, wind-chilled and flushed. Groceries in one arm, a new scarf for Junie tucked neatly in tissue in the other. He stopped short when he saw Mira in the kitchen. The envelope sat on the table between them like a ghost neither of them had invited. "You opened it?" he asked, not accusing, just surprised. "I didn't read it," Mira replied quietly. "I only saw the name. That was enough." Calder placed the bag down slowly. "So it's true," he said. "Whitmore means something to you." She gave a small nod. "My husband's name was Daniel Whitmore. Thomas was his father." Her voice faltered. "He died in a car crash 3 years ago." She paused, then added, "Or that's what they said." But nothing after that felt like an accident. Calder waited, giving her space. "They blamed me," she said. "Said I manipulated Daniel for his money. That I wasn't good enough. That Leo couldn't possibly be his son." She looked up at Calder, her voice steady but fragile. "But he was. Every part of him." Calder sat down across from her, the chair creaking under the weight of it all. "After the funeral, they tried to pay me off. Told me to take the money, give up custody, disappear quietly." Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "When I refused, they escalated lawsuits, smear campaigns, surveillance. One night I found a listening device under the dashboard. The next morning, someone shattered our front window." She exhaled. "That's when I took Leo and left. We didn't even pack." Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't cry. But her hands were trembling now, just enough for Calder to notice. He leaned forward. "You think Thomas was behind all of that?" "I can't say for sure," she said. "Daniel always said his father didn't trust anyone, not even him. And after the funeral, Thomas vanished. From my life, from the media, from the boardroom. It was like he disappeared off the map." Calder let out a long breath. "I got that letter the day I buried Noah," he said. "And I never opened it. Because what could a billionaire possibly write that would matter when your kid's gone?" Mira looked at him, eyes shining with something hard to name, part awe, part sorrow, part connection. "You lost a child too." He nodded slowly. "Noah. Cancer. He was 3. I still hear his laugh sometimes, especially when the house is quiet." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, her voice soft. "Maybe that's why Leo ran to your truck. Maybe he saw something in you that I wasn't ready to see yet." Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, while Junie and Leo bickered playfully over how many rings Saturn should have in their new blanket fort, Mira stepped outside onto the porch. Calder followed her, coffee in hand. The storm had passed, but the trees still wept quietly in the fading light. "I've been thinking," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "Maybe it's time I stop running." Calder raised a brow. "I'm tired," she admitted. "Tired of being hunted. Of watching Leo check the locks twice before bed. Of teaching him how to vanish instead of how to speak his truth." He sipped his coffee, saying nothing yet. "And if you stop?" he asked. Mira hesitated. "I want to go to the courthouse," she said. "I want to face them. The lies. The rumors. All of it. I want to stand there and tell the truth before someone else decides what it is. Calder didn't answer right away. That's brave, he said eventually. I'm not sure I have that kind of courage yet. You do, he said firmly. She looked at him then, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Calder, what if they find us? What if they take Leo? He didn't flinch. They won't. How can you be so sure? He looked out at the tall pines, the ridgelines still wet from rain. Because I know what it does to a child to believe they don't deserve love. And I swear I'd torch every courthouse in this state before I let that happen to your boy. Mira exhaled, something caught between a laugh and a sob. Are you always this dramatic? Only when it counts. That night, beneath a sky scattered with still stars, Mira found Calder alone at the kitchen table. The envelope was in his hands again. This time he opened it. Inside was a letter neatly written in elegant, slanted handwriting. Underscore 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 underscore. Mr. Wolf, my name is Thomas Whitmore. You don't know me, but I've been following your story. You owe me nothing, but I feel I owe you something. There are moments in life when we fail the people we love, when fear and power speak louder than decency. I failed my son. I failed my grandson. And I fear I may be failing you. If you're reading this now, know that I've watched you from afar, not as a man with wealth, but as someone who once believed in redemption. You haven't vanished. You haven't broken. You've endured. And for that, I may have something to ask of you. Underscore 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 underscore. Calder stopped reading and looked up. Myra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, though none had fallen. He knew, she whispered. Calder gave a slow nod. And he's on his way. Underscore 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 underscore. It was Junie who spotted the car first. She was out on the porch, coloring with a pink crayon in one hand and Kip the fox tucked beneath her arm. When she paused listening, the low hum of tires crunching gravel drifted up the road. Calder, in the kitchen pouring coffee, didn't notice until she called out through the screen door. Daddy, she said, there's a ghost car in the trees. He set the mug down and stepped outside. It wasn't a ghost. It was a 1970s Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, midnight blue and polished like a memory. It shimmered against the wild backdrop of dogwoods and split rail fences like something misplaced from another world. It rolled to a stop where the gravel faded into trees. And then stillness. Underscore 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 underscore. The rear door opened slowly. An old man stepped out. His movements were deliberate, not weak, just measured. A cane steadied his right side, but his posture remained straight as if defying time itself. He wore a tailored overcoat layered over a sharp gray vest. His silver hair was slicked neatly back, and for a moment he stood motionless like someone used to being watched and judged. Calder's hand tightened around the porch railing. Behind him, Mira stepped out. The second she laid eyes on the man, her breath hitched. "Thomas," she said softly. Inside, Leo peeked out the window. His expression shifted from confusion to stillness. Not recognition born of memory, but of blood. Thomas Whitmore stopped just shy of the porch and removed his hat. "I didn't come with lawyers," he said, "and I'm not here to offer apologies I haven't earned." Calder stepped down from the porch slowly, his body instinctively forming a barrier, though his stance wasn't threatening. "You didn't come all this way for nothing," he said calmly. Thomas nodded. "No. I came to speak. And maybe to listen." He turned to Mira. "You look thinner," he said gently. "I figured you would be. But you're still standing. I wasn't sure I'd see that again." Mira didn't answer. She crossed her arms, not as defense, but to keep something from falling apart inside. "You watched us," she finally said. "You knew what they were doing to me." "I knew fragments," Thomas admitted. "Enough to know better. Not enough to do what I should have." "And Daniel?" she asked. His expression flickered just briefly. "My son made choices I disagreed with," he said. "But he loved you. That part I recognized too late." Myra's voice caught. "He died alone. And your name was the last one he spoke." Silence settled like dust. Calder angled himself toward Thomas slightly, studying him. After a pause, the old man finally spoke again. "I know what they tried to do to you. I know the stories they spun about Leo. But I need you to hear something not from attorneys or interviews, but from me." He turned toward the boy, who now stood just behind the screen door. "I knew who Leo was the second I saw his smile. That was Daniel's grin. And the bravery in his eyes, that was all his mother." Leo stepped forward, pushing open the screen. Junie stayed behind, watching from the shadows like a child on the edge of a fairy tale she didn't want to end. Thomas slowly lowered himself onto the porch step so he was face to face with the boy. "I wasn't there when your father passed," he said gently. "I wasn't there when your mother needed someone to stand up for her. And no amount of money can change that." Leo looked at him, steady and calm. "Why now?" he asked. His voice was quiet but not timid. Not bitter. Just clear. And sharp in a way that felt older than his years. Thomas blinked. "Because watching from a distance might buy time, but it will never buy forgiveness." Underscore 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 underscore. Inside, Calder poured another cup of coffee and set it down in front of Thomas without a word. Mira sat beside Leo, one hand gently resting on his back. Calder leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You sent me a letter once," he said. Thomas looked up. "I didn't read it until 2 nights ago." Thomas nodded. "Then you opened it exactly when you were supposed to." Calder tilted his head, not entirely convinced. "You want something from us." Thomas didn't flinch. "I do, but not in the way you fear. I want to give Leo what's rightfully his name. His inheritance, his place in the legacy. But I won't take him from this home to do it." Myra's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's the condition?" "No strings," Thomas said. "Just a request." He looked back to Calder. "I spent decades building a life so guarded, so high-walled, I forgot what it was like to stand on the other side of anything real. When Daniel died, I was too proud to grieve with you, too afraid to stand beside the woman he chose." He turned his gaze to Leo. "If this boy is to carry my name one day, I want the man who actually raised him, the man who taught him to be kind and brave, to stand beside him when it happens." Underscore 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 underscore. The room went still. Then Junie, small and solemn, broke the silence. So, does that mean Calder gets to be like a grandpa too? Everyone looked at her. Thomas allowed the faintest smile to touch his lips. Maybe it does, little one. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, the Rolls-Royce remained parked under the trees, its polished chrome catching starlight. Thomas stayed in one of Calder's spare rooms. No security detail, no entourage, just a man, and a suitcase full of things he couldn't undo. Mira stood on the porch beside Calder, arms wrapped tightly around herself against the night air. "You trust him?" Mira asked, her voice low against the quiet night. Calder didn't answer right away. He stood there for a while, considering. "I think regret moves slow," he finally said. "But it does move." She looked down at her hands. "Part of me wants to let go. The other part wants to see him pay for every minute I spent afraid." Calder's smile was faint, without humor. "That just makes you human." She turned to face him. "What about Leo? Do you think he should go with Thomas?" Calder shook his head gently. "No. But I do think he should know the man." He looked out toward the forest where the shadows were long and still. "And if Leo's meant to inherit anything, he should do it from here. From the place where he learned what it means to build something with your own hands." Myra's expression softened. "You always seem to say the right thing." He gave a small shrug. "Not really. I just think about what I would have wanted for my son." She reached for his hand, not romantic, not quite, but steady and deliberate. And in that small gesture, something unspoken passed between them. Trust. Maybe the beginnings of something more. Underscore 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 underscore. In the living room, the fire had burned down low. Leo sat curled in Calder's old leather armchair, Kip the stuffed fox tucked under one arm. He was small in the oversized seat, his eyes watching the flames, though his thoughts were clearly somewhere else. Since Thomas had arrived, Leo hadn't said much. Not when the man apologized. Not when he offered a name or legacy or carefully packaged promises. Not even when Mira knelt beside him and whispered, "Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you." That was the hard part. Leo didn't know how to choose. He didn't know what made someone a father or what made a home feel like it belonged to you. But he knew how it felt. And maybe that was more important than any definition. Underscore 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 underscore. Outside, Calder split wood with slow, rhythmic swings of the axe. The only sound breaking through the thick morning fog was the steady thunk of metal on damp logs. The trees stood tall around him, their branches dripping mist, the scent of earth rising like steam from the fresh splits. He liked the honesty of it. Swing. Crack. Done. No lies. No agendas. No bloodlines to sort through. Just action and result. underscore 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 underscore. Inside the cabin, Thomas Whitmore sat at the kitchen table, sipping strong black coffee, his posture rigid with the discomfort of waiting. Today, though, he was a man learning how to be still. He watched Leo from across the room, the way the boy moved with intention, pausing to fix a crooked drawer at Calder's workbench without anyone asking. He watched Leo study a map of the nearby trails, quietly adjusting the lines where erosion had shifted the river bend. What struck Thomas wasn't just the boy's intelligence, it was his quiet confidence. It was something Daniel had never quite had. And it wasn't the kind of certainty taught in boardrooms or polished over private school dinners. Underscore 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 underscore. Calder walked back in, sweat still damp on his neck as he wiped it away with a rag. His gaze swept the room, landing on Thomas. "Looks like he's been watching you," Thomas said evenly. Calder tossed the rag over the back of a chair. "He's a sharp one." Thomas's eyes drifted to Leo, who was now flipping through a book on solar circuits. "And he listens too, even when he doesn't say much." Mira entered carrying 2 mugs of steaming chamomile tea, one for Calder, the other for Thomas. Her eyes gave nothing away. Thomas accepted the mug with a quiet nod. "Thank you." She said nothing in return. Just then, Junie bounded into the room, hair wild, cheeks flushed with sleep. She ran straight to Calder and wrapped herself around his leg. "You promised pancakes," she said into his jeans. "I did," he replied, tousling her hair. "Pancakes coming right up." Thomas watched her bounce toward the kitchen. "She's fearless." Calder smiled faintly. "She was born during a snowstorm. First night of her life, we kept her warm by a fire. She came out fighting." "I like her," Thomas said plainly. "You'd better," Mira muttered. "She runs the whole operation." Underscore 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 underscore. Once breakfast was cleared and the dishes stacked on the rack, Leo stood up. He walked to the middle of the room, back straight, voice steady. "If I take your name," he asked, looking at Thomas, "does that mean I lose mine?" Thomas set his mug down. "No. It means people might call you something new. But you don't lose anything unless you let it go." Leo nodded, thinking. "And if I go live in your house, does that mean I can't live here anymore?" Thomas hesitated. "Not necessarily. You could have both." Leo glanced at Mira. Then at Calder. "What if I don't want both?" The room fell completely still. Calder shifted slightly in his seat but didn't say a word. Thomas leaned in, "Slower now? Then I'll respect that. Whatever you decide." A silence followed, longer than most adults would have been able to sit through. Then Leo said, "I want to stay here. With Calder. With Mom. With Junie. I want to wake up in this cabin. I want to fix things and build stuff that's not just about money." Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "Okay," he said. But Leo wasn't done. "If I ever take the Whitmore name, it's going to be because I earned it. Not because it was handed to me like a trophy." underscore 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 underscore. Something moved in Calder's chest, something deep and old and wordless. He looked at Mira. She had turned away, quietly wiping at her eyes. Thomas leaned back in his chair. For the first time he seemed smaller. Not broken. Not rejected. Just aged. Softened. Leo, he said quietly, if your father were alive. I think he would have said exactly the same thing. Leo looked down at Kip, now clasped in both hands. He died before I could remember him, he said. But sometimes, I still feel him. In my hands. In the way I think. Thomas reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply placed it on the table. This was Daniel's, he said. His father gave it to him when he graduated MIT. He never wore it. Said it felt too heavy. Like it trapped him. Leo picked up the box and opened it. Inside sat a simple silver ring, clean, unmarked, quietly meaningful. Calder leaned in slightly. You don't have to take it, Calder said softly. Leo glanced around the room, his gaze steady. I want to, he replied. Not to wear it like a badge, but to remember where I came from. And to remind myself where I truly belong. That night, Thomas said little. He sat quietly by the fire, lost in thoughts he didn't share. By sunrise, he was gone. No drawn-out farewell. No grand gestures. Just a quiet thank you and one line to Calder as he stood near the gravel road. You didn't just save a boy, you saved the name he carries. Calder watched the Rolls-Royce disappear down the wooded road. The taillights swallowed by trees and memory. He turned back toward the cabin where Leo was in the middle of crafting a weather vane out of scrap metal and Junie was sketching planets across the wall in chalk, tiny orbits spiraling with color. And in the doorway stood Mira watching him come home. Mornings had turned sharper. The sunlight rose slower now, stretching long shadows across the porch. A light frost clung to the grass like sugared lace, glinting before fading into the breath of late autumn. Inside, the wood stove filled the cabin with heat. But the quiet between Mira and Calder had grown taut, not with unease, but with a quiet tension that hinted at something forming. Something waiting. Mira stood at the cedar chest, folding clothes with one hand, her left arm finally free of the brace. Her pace was measured, deliberate, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer had to rush through her own presence. Calder leaned in the kitchen doorway, a coffee mug in one hand, absently smoothing out a towel with the other. She glanced up. He didn't look away. Neither did she. Later that day, Mira told the kids she needed to make a trip to town to the courthouse. Calder drove. They didn't talk much on the way. But the silence between them wasn't empty. Mira sat with her fingers tightly laced in her lap, growing tenser with each mile. Calder glanced at her from time to time but let the silence hold. The courthouse was a proud red brick relic with white columns, too stately for a place so small, too self-important for how little it really knew. Mira froze on the steps, her breath shallow. Calder reached for her hand, grounding her. You're not walking in alone, he said. She gave him a small nod, pulled herself together, and climbed the stairs. Inside, she filled out the forms. She asked for a formal hearing to finally challenge the false accusations her late husband's family had let hang over her like a shadow. The clerk blinked when she saw the name. Daniel Whitmore's widow. The one who had disappeared. Mira straightened her back, standing taller. Calder remained silent, but his presence beside her was louder than any words. Afterward, they stepped out into the brisk afternoon air. The heavy doors closed behind them with a thud like the last breath of a storm. Halfway back down the ridge road, Mira finally broke the silence. I thought I'd fall apart in there, she murmured. But you didn't, Calder replied. I almost did. He glanced at her. But you didn't. She turned to the window, watching the blur of pine and light pass by. I think I've always been waiting for someone to stand beside me when I faced the hard things, she said. Then she looked at him. And you did more than stand next to me, Calder. You stood with me. He didn't answer. He just let his hand rest lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. That night, Junie and Leo built a telescope using PVC pipe and a cracked lens Calder found in the shed. Calder read aloud from a wrinkle in time, voice low and steady. The children leaned in, mesmerized. Mira curled beside him on the couch. She wasn't listening to the story. She was listening to him, to the rhythm of his breath, the shape of the words on his lips, the way his voice dipped when the story grew wide with wonder. And somewhere between those syllables, she realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was watching a man love a room without ever having to say the words out loud. Later, after the kids were tucked in, Mira wrapped herself in a blanket and stepped out onto the porch. Calder joined her, holding a mug of tea. The silence between them was full, comfortable, open. I almost ran, she said after a while. When? He asked. That first night, when I woke up and saw this place. Saw you. Knew it was safe. His brow lifted. Safe made you want to leave? She nodded. Because I didn't know what to do with it. Not anymore. He was quiet a moment, then said, I understand that better than I'd like. She turned to him. Do you ever wish you'd walked away? He stared out over the trees before answering. Every day I stayed after Noah died felt like I was betraying how broken I was. But leaving would have been a betrayal of the part of me that still hoped. She watched him. His face softened by the moonlight, edges no longer harsh. Calder. He looked at her. I don't know what this is between us, she whispered, but I feel it, and that terrifies me, because I didn't come here to fall in love. I came here to survive. He set the mug down gently. Then let's not try to name it, he said. Let's not call it love or timing or fate. Let's just agree on this. Whatever it is, it stayed, even when everything else didn't. Her eyes glistened. She leaned in, slow, unsure, and rested her forehead against his. His hand rose to the back of her head, steady and warm. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the space between heartbreak and healing finally had a name. And it was this. What passed between them wasn't about lips or labels. It was something quieter, deeper, the kind of closeness that doesn't rush or demand. It just tells the truth by staying. That night, Mira drifted off on the couch with a book resting on her chest. She never felt the blanket being pulled over her. Never heard the footsteps that tucked it in. Calder sat nearby in the old armchair, watching the fire flicker low. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Court hearings, legal filings, maybe even a battle for names and rights. But in that moment, his heart had stopped running. Not because it had nowhere left to escape to, but because it had finally found someone worth standing still for. The ribbon was more symbolic than anything, but Leo insisted on real scissors. These are proper ones, he said seriously. This matters. Junie held the ribbon straight with both hands, her tongue poking out as she focused, while Mira stood behind them, eyes glistening. Calder, still wearing boots dusted in sawdust and with a hammer sticking out of his back pocket, stood at the center of it all, half stunned, fully proud. They were opening a school that morning. Their school. It didn't have an official name yet. Calder suggested something sensible. Ridge Hollow Learning Center. Junie voted for Rainbow Unicorn School for smart kids and scientists. Leo quietly offered the Wolf Heart School for wonder. The hand-painted sign wasn't finished, so for now, it just read one simple word, welcome. But the name wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the building behind them. An old barn, reclaimed and repaired, windows catching the soft morning light, a wood stove glowing at the center, books donated from neighbors near and far, desks made from old doors, chairs that didn't match, solar panels on the roof, a shed full of tools, a wobbly globe beside the fireplace, still spinning, and a blackboard because every real school needs one of those. It had all begun with a letter, not from Thomas Whitmore himself, but from someone he'd quietly contacted, an ex-superintendent who'd grown tired of bureaucracy and was searching for something meaningful. She visited the cabin and saw what Leo had built from scrap and cardboard. Then she smiled and said, "Honestly, this is better than half the charter schools I've toured." She left with a handshake and came back with state forms, grant suggestions, and a list of 3 kids who had slipped through the cracks during the pandemic. "We could give them something," Calder said to Mira one night. She shook her head gently. "You already did," she said. "This is just the part where we make it real." The morning they cut the ribbon, neighbors arrived from all over. The mailman brought lemonade. Mrs. Greta, with her walker and soft voice, brought 6 loaves of banana bread. Someone showed up with a fiddle. Others came with nothing but their presence, and that was more than enough. They stood together, quiet witnesses to what had grown out of ash and heartache. Leo stepped forward and gave a speech. It wasn't loud or rehearsed, but it stilled the air. "I used to think I didn't fit anywhere," he said. "That being smart made me weird. That not having a dad made me less." Then he looked toward Calder. "But I came here, and I learned that family isn't about who you come from. It's about who stays." Later that evening, after the last hugs and handshakes had faded into the forest breeze, Calder sat on the porch steps, a cold drink in hand, boots still caked with dust from all the last-minute fixes he refused to let slide. Mira joined him with a book tucked under her arm, a soft smile curling at the edge of her mouth. "You know," she said, sitting beside him, "when I first got here, I thought you were a little odd." He chuckled. "That's a kind description. You didn't ask too many questions. Didn't try to fix me. You just gave me space." Calder looked out over the clearing where Junie and Leo chased each other with kites made from grocery bags and hope. "I've figured out," he said, "that most people don't need saving. They just need somewhere to land." She set the book beside her. "Do you ever miss the other world?" she asked quietly. "What world?" "The one with the deadlines and noise. The fast one. The loud one." He shook his head. "I miss the people I knew in it, but not the world itself." She nodded slowly, and then, without turning toward him, "I'm not scared of quiet anymore." He studied her then, the shape of her jaw in the evening light, the calm in her breathing, the small peace that had taken root in her posture. "I think I've been waiting for you," he said. Mira turned to him, eyes steady. "And I think I was waiting for a place like this. A man like you." The kiss didn't need ceremony. It didn't rush or reach for drama. It just was. Like a steady rain falling where the earth had cracked. Like 2 rivers finally choosing the same direction. That night, the school glowed softly under a blanket of stars. From the outside, it looked simple. But inside, on the blackboard, Leo's chalk marks still lingered. "What makes something worth building?" Calder had read those words before locking up for the night. He didn't have a textbook answer, but he knew how it felt. It felt like this. Like love built from steady trust. Like children laughing where grief once lived. Like a woman choosing to stay. And a man opening his door not with explanations, but with arms wide enough to shelter someone else's storm. The road ahead hadn't changed. Same curve through the cottonwoods. Same crunch beneath the tires. Same wide sky painted with the hush of autumn. But this time, they weren't running anymore. They were home. But everything else was different now. Calder eased the truck to a slow crawl, the tires crunching over familiar gravel. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden streaks across the windshield. Beside him, Mira rested her hand gently over his. In the back seat, Junie and Leo sat half asleep, their heads leaning against each other like they'd shared a childhood from the very beginning. No one spoke. They didn't have to. This was a return. A closing of a circle. Calder brought the truck to a stop near the edge of the ditch, the same place where everything had begun. The leaves were deeper now, layered in shades of copper and rust, but the landscape was unchanged. The slope where Mira had collapsed. The patch of grass where Leo had stood, waving in silence, begging the world to notice. Calder stepped out first. Then Mira followed. Their pace was slow, deliberate. It felt like approaching something sacred because it was. Right there, Mira said softly, her voice barely more than breath. That's where I fell. Calder nodded. And Leo stood right about there. 10 feet away. I nearly missed him. They stood together in silence, the wind rustling the branches above like the whisper of memory. A moment later, Leo appeared, Junie's hand in his. She murmured something to him and let go. Leo stepped forward and knelt at the base of the slope, not to grieve, but to remember. From his coat, he pulled out a small wooden stake and gently pressed it into the soil. Calder and Mira watched, unmoving, as Junie joined him to hang the sign. It was carved with care, the letters simple and certain. Here, someone stopped and everything changed. They didn't linger long. It wasn't a place for sorrow anymore. It had become a place for gratitude, for honoring what had been lost and found. Back in the truck, Mira reached across the seat and took Calder's hand in hers. I never told you, she said quietly, what I prayed that day, just before I blacked out. He glanced toward her, listening. I didn't ask to be saved, or even to survive. I just said, let him be okay. Calder squeezed her fingers gently. He is, he replied. She smiled through the shimmer in her eyes. And so am I. Weeks passed. The cabin had grown quieter with winter settling in. School was on break. Snow had come early, laying a soft blanket over the ridge. Calder had turned old fence rails into a sled, and the kids spent their afternoons flying down the hill behind the tool shed. That night, all 4 of them curled around the fireplace. Junie told ghost stories, arms waving dramatically. Leo explained Newton's third law using marshmallows and a spoon. Mira leaned into Calder's side, her head tucked beneath his chin, peace pulsing steady in her breath. You ever think about leaving? Calder asked, his voice low. She shook her head. I used to think that road stole everything from me, she whispered. But now, I think it brought me everything. He kissed her hair. No, he said. You gave yourself everything. You stayed. You fought. You kept going. She lifted her eyes to his, shining with warmth. I didn't keep going, she said. I fell. You're the one who stopped. And then she said it. The words that had lived in her chest for months, waiting for air. I love you. Calder didn't hesitate. I love you too. They married quietly that spring. No extravagance. Just the clearing. Just the people who mattered. Leo stood beside Calder as best man. Junie scattered wildflowers from her cupped hands. Mira wore a soft cream dress and tied a ribbon in her hair, the same shade as the leaves that had cushioned her that day in the ditch. Calder read his vows from a wrinkled slip of paper. His voice cracked halfway through. Mira didn't mind. She kissed his hands. And then his lips. And just like that, they built something stronger than shelter. They built home. That summer, the school expanded. More children came. More parents brought bread, stories, and tears. The barn became more than a place to learn. It became a place to begin again. To remember where you'd been and where you could still go. Thomas Whitmore visited from time to time. Never for long. He knew better now. He knew where he belonged and where he didn't. One evening, he sat beside Calder on the porch, watching Leo show Junie how to balance a compass needle on the spine of a book. He's going to outgrow us all, Thomas said quietly. Calder nodded. He already has. Thomas smiled faintly. You gave him something I never could. Calder didn't reply. He didn't need to. They both understood. Years later, Leo would return to that road. As a man. He'd kneel beside the stake he once planted and run his fingers across the carving. Here, someone stopped and everything changed. Then, in the hush of the forest, just loud enough for the trees to carry it, he'd whisper, "Thank you, Dad." The end.